Hello, welcome to English 3 Timeless Truths Parent Orientation. In this brief overview, we are going to discuss the content, policies, and procedures that our course will entail this year. Let's get started. Let's start with what the expectations should be. Set those right from the top. As a parent, you can expect several really great things from English 3. Solid literature and plenty of composition practice and hopefully growth. Our literature will focus on a survey of classic British and American lit, novels, short stories, and poetry, as well as several books of the Bible. I'll use weekly lit lessons for a little more than the first semester to overtly teach the tools that authors use to develop their craft. And then we'll see these demonstrated in the literature we read and then write about those things as we've seen them in the stories. Our comp styles will vary from single paragraph CEAs, the CEA is a claim example analysis paragraph, to academic essays and narrative pieces, just a whole variety there to work with both tone and word choice, levels of sophistication, that kinds of thing. Our pace is pretty quick though, about a piece every 2 weeks or so. I think in total we'll do somewhere around 19 pieces over 32 weeks. So we move pretty quickly, although don't panic, that's not an essay. That's, single paragraphs count in there as well. I'll also incorporate composition mini lessons that will overtly teach writing strategies for improving style and fluency. Those tricks and tips that strong writers need, and your student will hopefully appropriate those things into his or her writing, making the process that much easier and the result that much better. In the second semester, we're going to turn our focus to a study of Greek and Latin roots. These are so critical to our understanding and correct use of English vocabulary. And then overarching everything is this emphasis on critical thinking and analysis and then synthesis from an overtly Christian worldview. So our point is thinking. Like I will say this to your students over and over and over again. You have got to be a thinking consumer, right? Evaluating constantly what an author has to say, how he says it, and what we as readers and responders align with. Do I agree with that? Do I disagree with that? And why? Of course, all of these conversations, whether written or oral, will be grounded in a biblical worldview. First and foremost, before I'm a teacher, before I'm a wife, before I'm a mom, I am a Jesus follower. And as such, the Bible is the foundation for what I do and what I think. Students are not expected to be Christians to be in the class. They don't have to agree with all of my theology. However, just in the interest of full disclosure, you should know that that's where I'm going to be coming from. Let's talk about how our content is organized. So English 3 is tied thematically through various units. So within a unit, we'll have a spine of a text, like Fahrenheit 451, for instance. We'll have a theme that ties to, and then there will be short stories and poetry that align with that theme in many cases, like with Macbeth, with The Old Man and the Sea, and with the Screwtape Letters. We will also have a book of the Bible that we'll read through. We won't read through all of Daniel. That's a long book, and the last 6 chapters are a tad overwhelming and a little outside the scope of an English class. But we'll read half of Daniel, and that does fit really well within the scope of our English class. But our big themes will be to explore ambition and power, hope in the human spirit, persevering through difficulty, and then our big question at the end is what is real, reality versus illusion. To prepare us to think deeply, we're going to start the year with Fahrenheit 451. This is an engrossing dystopia. I'm telling you, Ray Bradbury was clairvoyant. He was way ahead of his time. He wrote this book in 1954, and it is incredibly relevant today. Ultimately, the point is that as we see the story unfold, we'll find that people need wide and varied information, not just from one state-approved source. The time to process what is read And then also the freedom to make decisions based on personal evaluation of that material. And this becomes the overarching premise through which we'll look at all material that we read over the course of the year. Wide and varied. Do you have time? Have you taken time to think through the messages being presented? And then you do, in fact, have the freedom to make decisions based on that. You can agree, you can disagree. You can choose to continue reading or not. Well, you can't choose to not continue reading if you want to pass the class, but you can choose to never read it again. How about that? Right? So if you want to pass the assignments, you can choose to sit it down and say, I'm not going to read this again. It's just not something that appeals to me. So this is such an incredible piece to read in this day of information wars. I do want to just give a brief warning, though, that it's probably rated PG-13. There's a fair number of uses of profanity, none of the big bad words. There's no F-bombs dropped, but there is a significant amount of profanity, and then it touches on some adult themes like suicide and nuclear war. I don't think there's anything that students aren't already exposed to on YouTube Shorts or TikTok, but just know that those elements are present. We will talk about that and what to do when we come across things that may not align with what we believe to be uh, the most pure way to say something. But then that will overview then where we go with all of the other themes. And our focus is on annotation. So getting into the text and keeping track of our thoughts as we read, not checking out, but what questions am I asking? What does this make me think of? What connections am I making? So I'll be giving students a weekly annotation guide, like these are things to look for while you're reading and to mark them in your text. Students will need to develop a way to do that. I am a huge fan of writing all over my books. If you were to look at my texts, they are written in, sticky noted on, highlighted, whatever, and students will need to develop their own system for doing that. And that, of course, is dependent on what you will allow them to do with their text. So you can let them know about that. In composition, we've already addressed the fact that we have lots of pieces. Here's the layout of where those are going to go, from CEAs to SER. That's going to be short essay responses. Synthesis essays will come at the end of a thematic study. So as we've read a novel, a book of the Bible, multiple pieces of poetry, and some short stories, we're going to pull that together into a synthesis essay, which pulls, oh gracious, all the things, all the threads, the themes, the MLA citations, like all of that together to develop a strong argument, depending, of course, on the prompt. On the left-hand side, you'll see all of the mini lessons that we'll cover, everything from using the rule of three and parallel structure to the they say, I say construct, this idea that the world is full of information that has been in a dialogue over the course of eons. And we then have something to say. The individual, your child, has something to say in response to that argument once they're aware of what it is. Avoiding wordiness, we're going to hit this really hard, this idea of being able to say things in the most effective, concise way. Let's see, general thesis as opposed to 3-point thesis, all sorts of very practical but short lessons on how to make take writing to that next level of sophistication. Let's talk a little bit about the drafting process. There isn't a drafting process that is regimented. In English 1 and most of English 2, first drafts always came to me that it's not the case. We don't actually have the time to do that because we're moving so much more quickly through our compositions. So students are not submitting D1s to me, except for 1 or 2 very specific pieces that I know are new for them, or a new style of writing. And also there's this expectation that students should be able to recognize what is working and what is not working at this point. However, with that being said, I am always willing, and I offer this with every piece. Hey, if you're not sure, shoot me your claim, text me your claim, or email me your thesis. Let me know, and I'll take a look at it and let you know if you're headed in the right direction. I'm happy to talk on the phone and walk through ideas for organization and structure. I say this frequently, and so few students take me up on it. But when they do, we end up having really productive conversations, and the student goes, oh, that's going to work really well, or I didn't know I could do it like that. So while they're not assigned to draft, I would highly recommend drafting, and then to bring me into the process if they're stuck. This goes all off the rails if they wait till, say, the night before the assignment is due to try to start writing it. It's just not a good plan. And of course, time management is the thing all of us struggle with the most. So how will your student manage the assignments? How will they manage this composition? And I will continue to encourage them that the way to manage it is not by procrastinating. That does not make it go away. And in fact, it makes 3 a.m. ever closer, you know. So, but I'm happy to help. I'll tell them that. You remind them of that. You see that they're overwhelmed, say, hey, why don't you just give Mrs. Massey a call? And I'm happy to help. So that brings us to this idea of the deadline standards. Assignments are due before the class, so class starts at 9 o'clock. It is on time. If it's time stamped 9 a.m., anytime after that, it's considered late. Late work is accepted. There's a grace period of 5 days. So work is due on Thursday. I will accept it through the following Tuesday with deductions for lateness. But after Tuesday, I'm not going to grade it anymore. It's just it's too hard for me to keep track of all the other grading load and then have this slow, incredibly frustrating trickle of late work come in. So I just have to draw the hard line that says after Tuesday, you put it in Dropbox. Maybe I'll give you some partial credit because you submitted something, but I'm not going to grade it after that. Materials for class include Microsoft Word. We do so much composition and there's so much back and forth that Google Docs really does not serve anybody's best interest. Google Docs and Dropbox are not particularly compatible. They used to be very compatible up until about 3 or 4 years ago when one or the other of them decided not to be. And so now if a document doesn't originate as Microsoft Word, for some reason in the back and forth process between my computer and your child's computer, things get kind of wonky and sometimes really frustrating for students because their document turns into almost like a PDF where they can't interact with that document anymore. They actually have to start something new and transfer things over. That's very frustrating for them. And so I ask that any compositions in specific are started in Microsoft Word somewhere, even if it's a different computer, right? And then built from there, and that's what we're going to use to go back and forth. Your student will need an English 3 notebook, which can be a hold in your hand notebook, 3-ring binder with dividers, or if they're more comfortable using technology than paper and pencil, it's totally fine. They're welcome to bring in a laptop or a tablet to class. As long as they've downloaded Dropbox, they can access it offline and pull up those documents in class as we go through them, marking things up, highlighting, taking notes, whatever they need to do right there in Dropbox. That's totally fine. They'll also need to bring the lit selection to class. We do a lot of quote sharing, so having those available will be helpful. And then, of course, something to write with comes in particularly handy. So make sure that they have something to write with. This is the grading setup for GradeKeeper that I'll use, the way that the scores are weighted, and you'll see that 60% of the English 3 grade is dependent on composition. The other 40 deals with literature, comprehension, and what the things that go along with that. So we have no tests in this class and no projects in this class, and only quizzes, and those will be graded in class together. The comprehension quizzes, these here, the 20%, those are always open book. And I encourage students to even make little notes as to where they're getting their information from. So what page could you base that on? Most of the comprehension quizzes, you should be able to go back to the text and point to this general area as to why you believe the way that you do about your answer. The composition handbook. So our writing style bar goes way up in English 3. English 1, it's fairly low. Our focus is organization and structure. In English 2, we're building in how to cite some sources. Maybe that's a little bit clunky still. Also, how to begin that process of sophistication. We start making these recommendations of avoiding linking verb structures or changing up sentence starters. By English 3, these things are required, and non-compliance with them will end up with some significant point drops. So in order to make all of this very clear, there's a composition handbook with all the rules. And if you know me, you know that I'm not a rule follower, as it turns out. But here we are. So there's a handbook of all the rules in the Dropbox folder already. I would encourage your student just to read through it so that he or she has at least become familiar, at least seen it one time. This is what's required. At the very end, though, just to make life a little bit easier, I've taken all those rules and turned them into a checklist. So I would encourage your student to print the checklist and then use that before turning in a final copy every time. Go through and make sure that you have actually addressed all those things. There's a reason for this. Like I said, I'm not a huge rule follower. I really am not a fan of when people try to tell me what to do. But what I'm ultimately trying to do is help your student be a successful writer. The big picture is that by limiting the number of linking structures they're allowed to use, or sentence starter, requiring sentence starter variety, or limiting how many contractions they can use to 0, for instance, students are then forced to write with intention. They have to figure out what they want to say before they start saying it, and eventually winding up, oh, well, eventually I got to my point 25 extra words later. So that won't work anymore. So our overarching quote, starting way back in English 1, is from that sage baseball player, Yogi Berra, when he said, if you don't know where you're going, you'll wind up someplace else. And that comes home to roost in English 3. To be a successful writer in this class, the student has to know where he's going and then determine the most effective way to get there. And this composition handbook forces that issue. It just forces more intentionality, and that's why we use it. So like I tell them, once you get out of English 3, your teacher isn't going to tell you that you can't use linking verb structures anymore, or only 2 per paragraph. Nobody makes those rules. But I'm saying that so that you can actually see how infrequently you need to use those structures, that you can say it a different way. And then when you do in fact decide to use a linking structure, it's because that's the way you want to say it, not because you accidentally ended up there. We will, as I already referenced, we will do a second semester morpheme study. This is looking at word roots, Latin and Greek roots. More information will follow as we get closer, but ultimately I'm going to provide a master list. You'll see there are some blanks within the list. This is for students to fill in as they go. This is good practice for them, but it has the list with the definition. And then they'll have 7 or 8 of these roots to study each week in order to prepare for the quizzes, which are application of those things. It's not just, multiple choice or fill in the blank. It's applying. These are quizzes that we'll take in class, but the questions look kind of like this. And the idea is that the student will need to develop a way that best works for him or her to study. So whether there's an app for that, flashcard machine, or a Quizlet, or a 3x5 cards, whatever works, your student will need to develop a way to study. But that's second semester, and we'll worry about that when we get there. Parent responsibilities. So parent responsibilities are relatively few, especially if you've come up through the ranks with me. These responsibilities have gotten lighter and lighter over time, over English 1, English 2, and then English 3, because obviously at this point, your child is in high school, in some cases in later high school, and is probably fairly independent in keeping up with assignments. However, when it comes to hand-holding, there is still some hand-holding that can happen. My mom proofread and critiqued my papers all the way through my college years. She was just great at it, and learning to ask people outside your own head to read your writing and give you feedback is a smart move, no matter how many years you've been writing. So there may still be some of that. Also, there may be a learning curve. If you are new to my classes, English 3 in itself is a learning curve to how do I do this and what am I supposed to do and where are all the linking verbs? They may need a little bit of hand holding, and that is totally fine. So whatever needs to happen with your family. Also, I'm happy to work with what you're seeing. And if you're finding that your student is very frustrated or overwhelmed, let me know and we can make some adjustments as to what those requirements might be. But keep up with their grades. It's pretty much all I'm asking. I will, GradeKeeper is my program. It is not something that I can make available to parents online. It's not a Canvas or a Schoology kind of idea. So it's on my computer. I will send out weekly updates, or if there's any major assignment that we've had, I'll send out an update after that. And you are always welcome to request that. It's not hard for me at all. It's like 3 clicks and I can send you a report. So if there at any time you're just wondering about missing work or what the current average is, I'm happy to send you a report. Just let me know. So our goals are, oh, actually, there was one more thing. When it comes to the hand holding part, um, let me just say that there is nothing wrong with offering some hand holding as the parent, as helping. But that line gets really blurry with this introduction of AI. Last year was the first time that I started to really notice the impact of AI in student writing, and I'm not super excited about it because, well, I'm sure you can read all the becauses. So I would ask that you use caution when purchasing programs like Grammarly. Grammarly Premium will literally change your students' words. Like, here's what your student wrote, and here's a completely different way to say the same thing, usually better, right? And that's fabulous, except that your student didn't write it. Grammarly did. And so it's in that process of wrestling with word choices that writers become writers. When you don't have to do that anymore because ChatGPT has done it for you, you don't actually learn anything. Your ability to communicate effectively stays the same, or in true Fahrenheit 451 form, it becomes less and less and less. So I am still trying to figure out how to navigate the AI world from the English teacher perspective. I think we all are, right? As this is becoming more and more a thing and a part of our everyday lives, and wondering who actually is saying it. Is it computer generated or is it a real human? That's a little tricky. Um, but just know that in the big picture, help is good, right? Sit and help your child. That's totally fine. Or if there's someone that your student looks up to as a writer, that's fine. But having a computer write your students' thoughts for them, well, it's kind of creepy, if you ask me. And I would just allow that with much caution. I won't. If I happen to recognize it and go, oh, that's not you, that's AI, I'm going to say, please go do this again so it actually sounds like you. So there's that. Anyway, so the goals. More than anything else, I want your child to leave English 3 aware of his or her need to not check out of life, to not let AI do the work for them, to be a thinking consumer and giver to society. Um, our kids need to learn to think, to analyze the message that they've heard, to pause. Oh my gosh, the pause, right? And that's addressed right from the top with Fahrenheit 451. We're just going at such a frenetic pace. But that pause to consider and then make a decision, like these things are so important. So that's really where I want them to come out of English 3 more than anything else, because as they go from here, most students are going into a dual enrollment situation or off to college, and then they're just inundated with messages that may or may not be the messages that we want them to be inundated with. And so I'm hoping to help equip them when they're trying to navigate those things. If in the end they can write smoothly, clearly, and with sophistication in response to those things that they are coming in contact with, even better. That is the cherry on top. So class starts next week. Your student will need to download the documents from Dropbox and save them to a device or print them off to put in a notebook. You should already have the Dropbox folder. Uh, If you are continuing with me after English 1 or English 2, you'll find that in the submitted work folder is your old work, is the student's old work from English 1 and English 2. You're welcome to take that out. You can delete it. You can save it. You might already have it, whatever, or you can leave it right there. It doesn't matter to me. I have copies of all of that. It's just that I didn't want to delete something in case you still needed it. So those things are there. But the week 1 documents as well as the composition handbook are already posted, and so students will need those things. Here is my phone number and my email. If there are any questions, concerns, whatever from you or your student, please let me know. Reach out to me. I'm happy to help, and I will see everybody in just about a week. Here it comes. Thanks for listening.